Hey guys, tonight we drift toward a sun-soaked island, where palm trees sway over sugarcane fields, but tension coils like a snake beneath the sand. It's the late 1950s, and while the rest of the world pretends to sleep under the shadow of the Cold War, something is stirring off the coast of Florida. Cuba, just 90 miles south of Miami, is becoming a magnet for secrets, fear, and revolution. You can almost smell the salt air mixing with tobacco leaves, hear the distant rumble of Jeep tires over gravel, and feel that dry-mouthed unease of knowing the neighbors are up to something and it might involve you. The Bay of Pigs invasion won't be pretty. You probably won't survive this, not because it's dangerous, but because, let's face it, you'll be outnumbered, outgunned, and absolutely swimming in murky politics. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where we all fall asleep together. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're stepping through Havana's cobblestone streets in 1959. The air smells like roasted pork and revolution. Music dances out of alleyways, rumba, mambo, and the occasional drunken shout. But something's shifting. You can sense it in the military boots scraping the pavement, and the eyes watching from windows just a moment too long. Fidel Castro and his rebel army have just overthrown the Batista regime. You glance down at the newspaper headline, Castro triumphs, and something about it feels different. This isn't just another coup. This is ideological TNT. You're not alone in thinking that. Up in Washington, men in sharp suits and darker intentions are peering at maps, mumbling about containment and communist dominoes. Cuba, in their eyes, has become a rogue flame flickering far too close to home, and with the Soviet Union ready to pour gasoline on it, there's a rising dread humming beneath the walls of the CIA. Meanwhile, Fidel's up in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, still sporting his guerrilla fatigues like he just rolled out of the jungle, because, well, he kind of did. He's charismatic, camera ready, and the kind of leader who speaks to the people like they're part of the plan, even when they're clearly not. He nationalizes industries, kicks out American companies, and smiles while he does it. And somewhere in the corner of every photo op, there's Che Guevara, doctor-turned-revolutionary, with a face destined for t-shirts. But you're in the middle of it. Maybe you're a worker in Havana, whose factory just became the people's property, or a fisherman from Matanzas watching Soviet ships roll into harbor, or perhaps you're just a groggy traveler caught in the chaos, sipping on strong Cuban coffee and wondering how this tiny island suddenly became the front line of the Cold War. You feel it most at night, when the radios crackle with speeches, propaganda, and long pauses where nothing should pause. You overhear people whispering about expropriations and counter-revolutionaries. You smell fear mixing with cigar smoke. Even the rhythm of daily life has changed. Where once it danced, now it marches. Now imagine this. Somewhere in a hidden sea briefing room, a projector flickers to life. The slide clicks. A map of Cuba glows against the wall, full of red pins and circles like angry measles. We have to stop this now, a voice says, before it spreads. Scientists still argue whether small-scale insurgencies like Cuba's are more contagious than we ever imagined, or if we just project our fears onto them. But in 1960, paranoia wins. The Eisenhower administration greenlights a plan, train Cuban exiles, arm them, send them back in secret, and hope the island's people rise up in support. Easy, right? Sure, if you ignore everything about human psychology, terrain, logistics, and basic luck. Meanwhile, life on the island grows more surreal. Soviet advisors begin showing up like uninvited guests who plan to move in. They help build schools and hospitals, but also fortify ports and expand intelligence networks. One mainstream scientific fact: the Soviets actually helped improve Cuba's public health infrastructure dramatically, reducing infant mortality within a few years. That's not the story you usually hear, but it's real. Of course, here comes the quirky bit. Fidel's inner circle once seriously considered breeding a line of revolutionary cows, resilient livestock that could survive off minimal feed and still produce milk. Revolutionary milk, apparently. The project failed, but the name, Uber Blanca, would later become a weirdly famous super cow in Cuban lore. Yes, you're welcome for that visual. Back on the mainland, CIA analysts chained smoke while drawing arrows on whiteboards. They named the operation Zapata, because even covert missions need catchy branding. You're now drifting through the planning rooms in Langley, where optimism and secrecy make for a combustible mix. They believe the Cuban people will rise up against Fidel the moment they hear the exiles have landed. It's the kind of wishful thinking that would impress even the most creative fan fiction writers. But back in Cuba, that's not what's happening. Instead, Castro is consolidating power. He's moving fast, restructuring education, building new militias, and broadcasting speeches so long they become background noise. Imagine someone giving a 5 or TED talk every other night, for years. That's Fidel. The island itself isn't quiet either. You've got pockets of rebellion, yes, but also informants in every cafe, and a population increasingly wary of strangers. If you try to ask too many questions, in Spanish with an accent from Miami, people will notice. That cold, uncomfortable notice. And here's where things begin to heat up. Literally, the U.S. imposes trade embargoes. Sugar shipments are blocked. Cuban businesses that once relied on American markets begin to fold. In retaliation, Fidel tightens his grip. Private newspapers vanish, and land reforms kick into overdrive. The revolution is no longer just political. It's economic, cultural, and deeply personal. Still, in your sleepy stroll through history, don't overlook this. The seeds of the Bay of Pigs aren't planted on Cuban soil. They're planted in the hearts of the exiles, men and women who fled, many under duress, who dream of going back, reclaiming homes, businesses, and a Cuba they remember through the soft focus of nostalgia. Many of them are training now, in the jungles of Guatemala, unaware that their mission will soon become one of the most infamous failures in American intelligence history. You drift along with time, through 1960 and into 1961. A new president takes office. John F. Kennedy, young, polished, and maybe a little too idealistic, steps into the Oval Office and inherits a plan already rolling. He's briefed. He nods. And then he says yes. Yes to the plan. Yes to the invasion. Yes to sending hundreds of exiles back to a place that's changed more than they realize. What no one realizes yet is how badly it's going to go. But we're not there yet. For now, the tension is simmering, like a pot left on a low burner in some tiny Havana kitchen, filling the room with steam, waiting to boil over. You're sitting in a folding chair under the Guatemalan sun now, sweat dripping down your back as you listen to instructions in broken English and military-grade Spanish. The air tastes like gun oil and dust. Around you are other men, Cubans, mostly, but also a few Americans with clean hands and practiced smiles. They're the trainers. You're the student. And this isn't boot camp. This is La Brigada, Brigade 2506. Your days are regimented with drills, disassembly of rifles, close quarters combat, and endless, soul-numbing lectures on tactics you're supposed to execute months from now. Some guys joke, some pace, some write letters home that they'll never send. The camp is isolated, surrounded by trees thick enough to swallow any secrets, and there are plenty of secrets. You wake early to the sound of jungle birds, and go to bed sore from crawling, running, hiding. Some nights, under the stars, someone will ask, "What if we don't win?" And someone else will reply, "That's not an option." It's not bravado. It's desperation. You're in it now. They've shaved your hair. You've signed the paperwork, though you're not really sure who for. Some say the CIA. Others say the State Department. There's even a guy who insists he met Nixon once. Everyone has a story. Most have scars, old ones from Cuba, new ones from training accidents. The Americans call this plausible deniability. If you fail, they didn't know you. If you succeed, they'll applaud from behind mirrored glass. Scientists still argue whether plausible deniability actually protects a government, or if it's just a fancy way to dodge consequences while making the whole thing messier. Back in Washington, Kennedy's advisors are chewing their nails over how much to involve the military. The president, barely settled into his seat in the Oval Office, is wary of fingerprints. He wants the invasion to look like a Cuban-led rebellion, not a U.S.-sponsored regime change. So, the plan gets leaner, sneakier, and, unfortunately, riskier. Here's the quirky part. During this phase, a CIA agent genuinely proposed using fake Castro beards, yes, fake facial hair, sprayed with chemicals to embarrass him on TV by making it fall off mid-speech. Another suggested dousing his radio studio with LSD so he'd start giggling uncontrollably. You can't make this stuff up. And yet, these ideas made it into official memos. But you're still crawling through Guatemalan brush. You're learning to fire bazookas at half-sunken wrecks, building stamina, forming bonds. They tell you that when you land in Cuba, the people will rise up. They tell you this will be the glorious return. You want to believe them. You have to. Then comes April 1961. The plan is finalized. The invasion point, a quiet stretch of coastline called Playa Goran, part of the Bahia de Cochinos, the Bay of Pigs. You trace it with your finger on the map. The logic is that it's remote, swampy, and unguarded, perfect for a surprise landing. But you notice something odd. There's only one real road leading inland. If someone figures that out, you'll be stuck. Still, the higher-ups insist it's fine. Trust the plan. You feel the nerves kick in as supplies are loaded. Crates of weapons, old U.S. planes painted to look Cuban, parachutes, boats, rations. A few final prayers are muttered. Someone carves, Libertad o Mort, into the wood of a shipping crate. Freedom or death. That's the mood. And now, we have to talk about those planes. See, the invasion starts not with boots, but with bombs. April the 15th, 1961, 2 days before the beach landing, 8 American B-6 bombers, painted to resemble defected Cuban Air Force planes, take off from Nicaragua. Their mission, strike Cuban airfields and cripple Castro's tiny air force before the real show begins. You're probably thinking, wait, 8 planes. Yup, that's it. Not exactly overwhelming force. One mainstream scientific fact, the B-6 Marauder was a solid medium bomber used in WWII, but by 1961, it was considered old tech, slow, vulnerable. One pilot later described flying it over Cuba as, like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. And guess what? The Cubans weren't fooled. Not even a little. Their radar tracked the bombers. Their anti-aircraft guns opened fire. They shot down some of the planes, captured one pilot, and held press conferences displaying the wreckage and the American-made parts. So much for deniability. To make matters worse, Kennedy cancels the second airstrike, worried it'll make the U.S. look too involved. That single decision might be the one that seals your fate. Without full air superiority, the invasion becomes exponentially more dangerous. But no one tells you that. Not yet. Instead, you're boarding a boat under moonlight. The ocean is oddly calm, like it's holding its breath. You stand at the rail with a dozen others, clutching your rifle, feeling the salt on your lips, watching the stars shimmer above a sea that doesn't care if you live or die. By dawn, you're approaching the Cuban coast. There's the smell of fuel, sweat, and anticipation. Your boat jolts as it hits shallower water. Orders are shouted. The first wave hits the beach. What you see next is chaos. The landing is messy. The beach is soft. The boat's heavy. Trucks don't start. Communications jam. And worst of all, there are locals, not cheering, but staring, confused. Some run to alert the militias. Others just watch from a distance, hands shielding their eyes from the morning sun. They don't rise up. Instead, Castro sends tanks. Within hours, you're pinned down. Cuban planes strafe your position. Remember those airfields. They weren't destroyed. The Cuban pilots fly low and angry, making pass after pass. You scramble into the swampy terrain, the warm mud sucking at your boots, bullets whizzing through palm trees. You shout to someone in the distance. He doesn't respond. He's already gone. By the afternoon, it becomes painfully clear. There's no uprising, no reinforcements, no way out. Here's your fringe fact for this section. The Bay of Pigs invasion was supported by Radio Swan, a covert CIA-run station on a tiny Caribbean island. It blasted out anti-Castro propaganda, and even tried to incite rebellion with dramatic broadcasts mid-invasion. The problem, most Cubans didn't have radios powerful enough to pick it up, and the message was scrambled in translation, literally and figuratively. You fight through the night, low on ammo, Your group fractured. Supply boats are sunk before they reach shore. The CIA hesitates to send more help. Kennedy, faced with global outrage and Soviet warnings, pulls back. You're stranded. By the third day, it's over. Surrender is your only option. You're marched off the beach barefoot, covered in dirt and mosquito bites, past villages where children peek out from behind fences. You see posters of Fidel and Che on walls, slogans painted across crumbling stucco. The revolution didn't end. It deepened. And you become a prisoner. As the sun sets on Playa Goran, the bodies are counted. The mission is declared a failure, publicly, humiliatingly. It's the kind of blunder that textbooks love and politicians hate. Kennedy takes responsibility, but behind the scenes, fingers point in every direction, and you lie awake in a cell, wondering if any of this could have gone differently. Maybe if the second airstrike had launched. Maybe if the beach wasn't a trap. Maybe if the world were simpler. The cell you're in smells like mold and cold stone, the kind of scent that clings to your clothes even after you leave. If you leave, your back aches from the concrete slab they call a bed, and your dreams, when they come, are heavy with gunfire and sand. The guards don't speak to you much. When they do, it's clipped Spanish, sometimes laced with sarcasm, sometimes pity, but not cruelty. Not yet. You're one of over 1,000 captured. You're not alone, though the silence between prisoners says otherwise. Some of the guys who trained beside you didn't make it. Others are in nearby cells, calling softly through the walls like prisoners tapping Morse code in forgotten submarines. You all carry the same look in your eyes, disbelief wrapped in exhaustion. You're only just beginning to understand the scale of the disaster. Outside, the Cuban government is staging parades. They call it the first great defeat of Yankee imperialism in Latin America. Castro's speeches roar over loudspeakers, words like valor and patria and victoria. He stands triumphant in olive fatigues, and speaks with the fervor of a man who's just been handed a miracle. Because from his perspective, it was a miracle. You hear rumors that JFK is furious, that Alan Dulles, the CIA director, is in deep trouble, that heads are rolling in Washington. But here, behind bars, it doesn't matter. The only head that matters is your own, and it's still buzzing with questions, like why the invasion was approved in the first place. So let's pull back. Remember that post-WWI world, the United States and the Soviet Union locking horns, testing each other's patience on every continent. This invasion wasn't just about Cuba, it was about messages. Cuba had gone red, and not quietly. Castro had cozied up to Khrushchev and started nationalizing industries, including ones with American money in them. So when Eisenhower left office, he handed Kennedy a loaded gun, a covert operation already halfway baked. Kennedy, newly elected, had to decide whether to pull the trigger. Scientists still argue whether JFK genuinely believed the Cuban people would rise up, or if he simply felt cornered by Cold War pressure. Either way, he approved a slimmed-down version of the plan, one that was supposed to offer maximum impact with minimal traceability. The result, the opposite. Back in your cell, a mosquito buzzes near your ear. You swat without thinking, a reflex left over from the swamps of Goran. A guard walks by and tosses in a slice of bread in a tin of water. It hits the floor with a thud. You don't even flinch anymore. Your captors parade you, in front of cameras, not to beat you, just to show the world that the invaders were real and American-backed. They make you read statements. Sometimes they let you write letters. Mostly they let you sit. Now here's your mainstream scientific fact for this chapter. Long-term captivity, even without physical torture, has measurable effects on the brain. Neural scans of former prisoners showed changes in the amygdala and prefrontal cortex, areas tied to fear response and decision-making. Even expecting trauma can rewrite your brain's wiring, so you're not imagining things when the walls start to feel like they're pressing in. Despite the humiliation, the worst part is not knowing what comes next. And here's your quirky tidbit. During your internment, Castro himself occasionally visits the prisoners. Not often, but when he does, it's surreal. The man is larger than life, like watching a statue give a TED talk. He doesn't yell, he lectures. Some guys spit, some guys sit quietly. One guy claims he tried to challenge Castro to a chess game. Nobody believes him, but it's a story that gets whispered across the cells like bedtime gossip. Meanwhile, back in the States, America is reeling. The Bay of Pigs failure isn't just a foreign policy misstep, it's a media explosion. Headlines call it a fiasco. TV anchors raise eyebrows at CIA meddling. Behind the scenes, Kennedy is ice-cold furious. He fires the top brass at the CIA, including Dulles. He sets up a special advisory group to make sure this never happens again. And yet, paradoxically, this blunder makes JFK stronger in the eyes of the public. He admits fault, takes the hit. Americans respect that. They like a guy who owns his mistakes, even big ones. There's something human in it, and in the weird way politics works, Kennedy's approval ratings begin to rise. You, however, aren't watching approval ratings. You're counting cracks in the ceiling. You spend months in that cell. Some of the others are put to work in agricultural fields. Others are moved to different facilities. You're part of what becomes a political bargaining chip. Over 1,100 men who cost the U.S. government millions to train and now sit rotting in cells that stink of mildew and political failure. Back-channel negotiations begin. The U.S. wants you back, badly, but there's pride involved. Castro doesn't just want money, he wants medicine, baby food, tractors. Yes, tractors. In exchange for you and your fellow prisoners, he demands $53 million worth of humanitarian aid. A strange price tag for what was, technically, an act of war. And the debate rages. Should America ransom its failed invaders? Should it acknowledge that the whole thing was a mistake? Or should it pretend the whole thing never happened, and let you fade into political purgatory? Scientists still argue whether prisoner exchanges like this one embolden future hostilities or prevent them. Does appeasing your enemy encourage more aggression? Or is diplomacy the only rational escape hatch? Eventually, Kennedy caves. The deal is made. The food and medicine begin arriving in Cuba, and you're finally told to pack what little you have. A crumpled photo, a Bible with the cover half torn, a dog tag from a friend who didn't make it. When you're released, it feels surreal. No parades, no press, just a quiet flight back, followed by a cautious re-entry into a country that's still trying to forget the whole episode happened. You step onto U.S. soil, blinking against the light, and are greeted by officials with forced smiles and clipboards. Some families are there, waving flags. Others are absent, either out of shame or heartbreak. You're free, but you don't feel like a hero. The country treats you with an odd mix of reverence and avoidance. You get medical checks, debriefs, the occasional handshake. You're offered a modest allowance, maybe a job placement, but mostly, you're expected to move on, to blend back in, to smile in photos and nod politely. When someone calls you a patriot, you go home. You stare at ceilings that don't leak. You eat meals that aren't bread and tin water. And you try not to dream of sand and mosquitoes and the sound of planes you never saw coming. And through it all, one thought keeps returning. What exactly went wrong? You read books. You hear theories. Some say the CIA failed in planning. Others say Kennedy pulled back too soon. Some blame the Cuban exile leadership for being too fractured, too idealistic. The truth is, it was probably all of it. A perfect storm of miscommunication, overconfidence, and underestimation. And here's where things get truly strange. You start noticing how the invasion's failure becomes fuel for other conflicts. Khrushchev now sees Kennedy as weak. Less than a year later, he places nuclear missiles in Cuba, triggering the Cuban Missile Crisis. The dominoes fall, and you, just one piece on the board, start realizing how close the world came to ending because of your mission. But that story's for another night. Tonight, you're just a guy who tried to change history and got history's mud in your mouth for the trouble. You close your eyes and drift somewhere between regret and relief. You wake up to the same dim light, filtering through your cell's small barred window. The sound of footsteps echoes down the corridor, steady and unyielding like a metronome, marking time in this limbo. You feel the chill in the air, a persistent reminder that freedom is not measured by the opening of a door, but by the warmth inside your chest, which right now feels distant and numb. You are one of the prisoners preparing for what seems like a routine transfer. Your thoughts drift to the last few months in captivity, the staleness of the air, the endless hours staring at cracked concrete walls, the smell of damp earth leaking through cracks in the foundation. You try to recall the texture of sunlight on your skin before all this, but those memories feel as faded as the torn flag patch on your uniform. Today, You're being moved from the infamous La Cabana fortress to another location. The transfer itself is a reminder that you're not just a prisoner, you're a pawn in a chess game, where the players are governments, ideologies, and powerful men who never met you, but decide your fate anyway. As the guards escort you out, you notice the countryside stretching beyond the prison walls, lush greenery that seems almost cruel in contrast to the bleakness inside. The heavy scent of tropical flowers mingles with the distant hum of insects, a sensory overload after months of sterile confinement. It's almost mocking how life outside carries on with indifferent beauty. Scientists still argue whether prolonged exposure to such sensory contrasts between confinement and bursts of natural stimuli helps prisoners mentally recalibrate or intensifies the sense of disorientation. In your case, the bright sun feels both like a blessing and a punishment. You squint against it, momentarily blinded by freedom you can't fully grasp. During the bumpy ride to your new holding facility, you overhear snippets of conversation in Spanish and English. Some guards joke about the failed invasion, others seem more thoughtful, less inclined to make light of it. You wonder if any of them question the cost of the mission, or if they're just playing roles handed down by orders. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some prisoners start carving tiny, delicate chess pieces from scraps of wood they find in the prison yard. It's a way to reclaim control, to assert intellect and strategy in a place where brute force dominates. One guy even claims he's teaching another prisoner how to play blindfold chess, relying purely on memory. The absurdity is strangely comforting. Your new cell is smaller but cleaner, with a sliver of light cutting through a barred window high above. You stretch and notice your muscles are stiff, a reminder that your body has been under constant stress. Your thoughts swirl, plans for after release, doubts about ever truly escaping the shadow of this failure. At night, the distant rumble of the ocean mixes with the occasional call of nocturnal birds. It's a soundscape that invites reflection. You think about the science behind sleep and memory consolidation, how the brain uses rest to stitch together experiences into a coherent narrative. In here, your dreams are patchwork quilts of past battles, fleeting hope, and unspoken fears. The guards bring your meager meals, a thin stew, a piece of stale bread, and water. The food is bland, but it fills a hunger that's more than physical. You notice some prisoners sharing scraps, forming fragile bonds in the face of uncertainty. It's these small acts of kindness that become lifelines, tiny sparks of humanity in a cold world. Meanwhile, back in Washington, political pressure mounts. JFK's administration is trying to balance international diplomacy with domestic outrage. Some senators call for a full inquiry, others push for increased covert operations elsewhere. The CIA scrambles to cover tracks and prevent future embarrassments. Scientists still debate whether intelligence failures like this stem from flawed human judgment or systemic organizational issues. Was it a breakdown in communication, overconfidence, or just bad luck? Probably all three. You can't help but think about your fellow soldiers still in the field, or worse, still fighting in your name. The invasion may have failed, but the Cold War's chessboard continues to shift, with pieces moving in unpredictable ways. Tonight, as you lie on your cot, the sound of distant waves lulls you into a restless sleep. You wonder what the next day will bring, and if you'll ever see the sun without bars in your vision. The dawn breaks soft and quiet, the kind of morning that feels almost gentle, until you remember where you are. You wake, stiff and aching, in the same cell that's beginning to feel like an extension of your own body, a cage you can't fully escape, even in dreams. The air is thick with humidity, wrapping around you like a damp blanket, making each breath a little heavier. Outside, the sounds of the prison yard slowly come to life, the shuffle of boots, the sharp commands in rapid Spanish, the occasional laughter that feels out of place in such a grim setting. You realize that even here, life pulses stubbornly, refusing to be snuffed out. Today, something different is in the air. The guards are nervous, their usual banter replaced by hurried whispers. You can't understand all the words, but you catch intercambio and medicina, words hinting at exchange and medicine. Your heart quickens, though you try to mask it behind a calm facade. As the day unfolds, you learn that the U.S. government is negotiating your release, along with the other prisoners. Castro is demanding a hefty ransom, food, medicine, tractors even. The image of tractors strikes you as oddly mundane in such a high-stakes situation, almost like a bizarre punchline in a grim comedy. It's as if the world outside your cell is bargaining over farm equipment while you count days like breaths. You start to think about the broader picture again. The Bay of Pigs was just a single act in the sprawling Cold War drama, but its fallout shaped the geopolitical landscape in unexpected ways, intensifying the standoff between the US and the Soviet Union. You're caught in the crossfire of superpowers wielding ideologies like weapons, each move calculated to outsmart the other without triggering total annihilation. Scientists still argue whether the failure of the Bay of Pigs made the Cuban Missile Crisis inevitable or if it was just a coincidence in the Cold War timeline. Either way, the tension in the world rises like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. You reflect on the psychological toll of captivity, the uncertainty, the waiting, the forced inactivity. It chips away at your resolve. Yet, it also teaches you patience, a brutal but effective teacher. You learn to find small victories, a shared smile, a scrap of conversation, the fleeting freedom of a bird's song carried through the bars. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some prisoners have taken to making art from scraps, drawings on walls, intricate patterns in dirt, even whispered poetry. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, that even in the darkest places, creativity finds a way to bloom. The guards, meanwhile, seem less like enemies and more like weary actors in a play they didn't write. Some look away when prisoners catch their eyes. Others offer a nod or a rare word of kindness. You realize that behind uniforms and orders, they too are caught in the machinery of history, bound by duty and circumstance. As negotiations drag on, you hear stories from released prisoners. Some say they felt relief, others say freedom came with a heavy price, displacement, suspicion, a sense of being out of place in their own country. The world they return to has changed, just as they have. Scientists have studied the reintegration of POWs and found that many face long-term challenges, PTSD, difficulty reconnecting with family, and the haunting question of purpose after survival. It's a slow, often invisible battle that continues long after the physical chains are removed. Tonight, you lie back on your cot and stare at the ceiling, imagining the life waiting beyond these walls. You think about the vast ocean separating you from home, the planes that never came, the dreams deferred but not forgotten. You breathe deeply, trying to steady the mixture of hope and fear that churns inside you. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: the story of the Bay of Pigs is far from over, and you, whether you like it or not, are part of that story, etched into the fabric of a conflict that shaped the world in ways no one saw coming. As sleep finally pulls you under, you carry with you the faint sound of waves, the distant hum of a world turning beyond your reach. You wake again, this time to the sharp scent of coffee drifting through the air, mixed with the faint saltiness carried from the nearby sea. The smells remind you that life outside these walls goes on, indifferent to your captivity, your uncertainty. You feel the runness of the cot beneath you, the scratch of your uniform's fabric against your skin. It's a morning like many others, but today you can't shake the feeling that something is shifting. News arrives that the Cuban government has agreed to release some prisoners in exchange for aid. It's a complicated dance: food, medicine, tractors, cash, commodities that seem mundane, yet carry the weight of political bargaining. You wonder what it must be like for the leaders to sit in air-conditioned rooms, negotiating your freedom like a business deal. You recall the intricate planning that went into the invasion itself. The CIA-trained Cuban exiles, the secret training camps in Guatemala, the hope and desperation that fueled the mission. It's strange to think that your current predicament stems from a carefully orchestrated plan meant to overthrow a regime, but ended up unraveling in ways no one anticipated. The Bay of Pigs invasion was a classic example of Cold War hubris. The U.S. government underestimated Castro's support among Cubans, overestimated the likelihood of a popular uprising, and failed to anticipate the swift Cuban military response. It's a reminder that even the most meticulous plans can collapse under the weight of reality. Scientists still argue whether the invasion's failure was primarily due to poor intelligence or flawed strategy. Some say it was a lack of understanding of Cuban society, Others blame rigid bureaucracy and overconfidence. You, lying in your cell, see it as a lesson in the unpredictability of human nature and politics. There's a quirky bit of history here. Before the invasion, CIA operatives tried to use psychological warfare, techniques like broadcasting fake news and creating confusion to weaken Castro's grip. They even attempted to poison fish in Cuban lakes to disrupt food supplies. It sounds like something out of a spy novel, but it was all too real. Back in your cell, you spend time thinking about your fellow prisoners. Each has a story, a reason for being here, a life interrupted. You hear whispered conversations about families, lost loves, dreams of freedom. It reminds you that behind the political chessboard, real people pay the price. The guards bring your meal, the stew thick and bland, but today, you taste something different, a hint of hope mixed with the bitterness. You chew slowly, savoring each bite as if it were a luxury. You realize hunger isn't just about food, it's the craving for normalcy, for a life unshackled by fear and walls. Sleep remains elusive tonight. Your mind drifts to the ocean beyond the prison, imagining the waves crashing against the shore, the salt air refreshing your spirit. Scientists have studied how natural environments help reduce stress and improve mental health, a concept you cling to as you lie in this man-made cage. As you close your eyes, you recall the faint glow of bioluminescent algae you once saw on a beach, tiny organisms lighting up the water like stars. It's a strange comfort, this reminder that even in darkness, light finds a way. Tomorrow holds unknowns, but for now, you hold on to these small sparks of hope, waiting for the day when the gates will open, and the world will once again feel like home. The morning arrives with a cool breeze that slips through the tiny crack in your cell window, carrying with it the faint sound of distant church bells ringing over the coastal town. The air tastes faintly of salt and earth, a sensory reminder of the world outside, where life continues spinning, oblivious to your confinement. You run your fingers along the rough concrete walls, tracing the faint scratches left by past prisoners, silent echoes of hope, despair, and time slipping by. Today, word comes that negotiations between the U.S. and Cuban governments have hit a snag. The promised aid packages and medical supplies are tangled in bureaucratic red tape, and the fragile trust between both sides teeters on the edge of collapse. You can feel the tension in the air, thick and palpable, like the humid heat that settles over the island at midday. You try to keep your mind occupied, recounting the details of the invasion itself, how a ragtag group of exiles, trained and armed by the CIA, landed on the Playa Goran beaches. The initial hope for a swift uprising crumbled as Castro's forces, alerted early on, mobilized quickly and decisively. The beaches turned into a nightmare, with amphibious vehicles bogged down in the shallow waters, and aircraft caught in anti-aircraft fire. The invasion was a crushing failure, and you, now a prisoner, live the consequences every day. Scientists still debate whether the Bay of Pigs failure was a result of inadequate intelligence or sheer overconfidence by the planners. Some argue the CIA grossly underestimated Castro's popularity and the cohesion of Cuban forces, while others believe internal miscommunications and delays doomed the mission from the start. You realize how fragile plans can be when human unpredictability and politics collide. Here's a quirky detail to lighten the mood. During the invasion, some of the Cuban exile pilots mistakenly bombed their own forces due to miscommunication and fog of war. Imagine being caught in friendly fire while trying to reclaim your homeland. A tragic irony that borders on the absurd. As you lie on your cot, you recall stories shared in hushed voices, tales of bravery and mistakes, camaraderie and betrayal. You think about the many unsung heroes, the foot soldiers, whose names you may never know, who face danger with grim determination. Their spirits linger in this place, woven into the very walls. The prison guards maintain their routine, but occasionally you catch a glimpse of exhaustion or doubt flicker across their faces. They too are caught in this web of history, their roles scripted by forces far beyond their control. Scientists have found that prolonged stress like yours affects brain chemistry, leading to anxiety and memory lapses. It's a cruel irony that your mind, your most precious tool for survival, is also vulnerable to the invisible damage of captivity. Tonight, as the sky darkens, and stars begin to blink awake, You listen to the steady rhythm of waves crashing miles away. You imagine the cool water slipping over your skin, the freedom of movement you crave. Sleep comes slowly, wrapped in the bittersweet ache of longing and resilience. You wake to the faint sound of a radio broadcast filtering through the prison walls, a crackling voice reciting news about the unfolding Cold War chess match that surrounds you. The world outside your cell seems both distant and unbearably close, a stage where powers maneuver in silence, playing high-stakes games with lives like yours as pawns. The Bay of Pigs was only the opening move in a much larger conflict, and you feel its ripples deep in your bones. The guards bring your breakfast, a modest serving of black beans and stale bread. The flavors are muted but familiar, grounding you in this strange limbo between hope and despair. You chew slowly, eyes tracing the peeling paint of the ceiling above, a silent witness to countless dreams both shattered and preserved. You think back to the CIA's covert role in the invasion, how they trained and funded Cuban exiles to be the spearhead of the operation. Their plan hinged on a quick, decisive blow meant to ignite a popular revolt, but the hoped-for uprising never materialized. Instead, the invasion force found itself isolated, outgunned, and surrounded. It was a crushing defeat not just militarily, but symbolically, embarrassing the United States on the world stage. Scientists still argue whether the failure was due more to the Cuban military strength, or the lack of broader international support for the operation. Some believe the U.S. underestimated the resolve of Castro's regime, and the loyalty it commanded. Others suggest the secrecy surrounding the plan backfired, leaving allies in the dark and forcing the CIA to act without necessary diplomatic backing. Here's a quirky tidbit. In the chaos, some Cuban exile pilots flew their planes with nicknames painted on them. The Cuban Express, La Libertad. The planes were symbols of hope and identity, but their missions ended in fiery crashes or forced landings. It's a poignant reminder of how hope and tragedy often fly side by side. The prison yard outside buzzes with muted life, snatches of conversations, a football kicked unevenly across cracked concrete, a bird flitting briefly above the barbed wire. You wonder about the guards' lives beyond this place. Do they have families, dreams, or is this all they know? The endless cycle of watch and wait. Scientists have studied the psychological toll of imprisonment and found that the unpredictability of daily routines is among the most stressful factors. It's not just the confinement but the uncertainty that gnaws at you, making each day a battle of wills. As evening falls, you gaze out through the barred window, watching as the sun melts into the horizon, setting the sea aflame with orange and red. The world beyond your reach feels both vast and intimate in this twilight moment. Sleep approaches with the rhythm of the tides, slow and steady, carrying you away from the cold concrete and into the softer realms of dreams. And as you drift, you remember the small glimmers of resistance, the whispered jokes, the secret songs, tiny sparks of humanity refusing to be extinguished. You awaken slowly to the muffled sounds of distant thunder rolling over the hills, a soft rumble that vibrates through the concrete beneath your feet. The air feels heavier today, thick with the promise of rain, and the faint scent of damp earth drifts in through the narrow bars of your cell window. You listen closely, letting the rhythmic drumming of raindrops on the prison roof blend with the heartbeat of your own thoughts. The rain is a strange companion, sometimes soothing, sometimes relentless. You recall how, during the Bay of Pigs invasion, unexpected weather played a quiet but crucial role. Morning fog and intermittent showers slowed amphibious landings and confused reconnaissance flights. The very elements themselves seemed to conspire against the already faltering plan. Scientists still argue whether better weather forecasting could have altered the outcome of the invasion. In the early 1960s, meteorology was far less precise, relying heavily on human observation and basic instruments. Today, satellite technology would have given planners detailed, up-to-the-minute updates, but back then, they had to trust the skies to cooperate. You remember a quirky little fact you once read. During the invasion, the Cuban forces reportedly used fireworks as a signal to their troops, illuminating the dark skies and causing confusion for enemy pilots. The idea of using something so festive in such a deadly context feels oddly surreal, like a cruel prank played by fate. As you sit on your bunk, the scent of wet stone and mildew mixing with the stale air, You notice the small signs of life in the prison yard. A rat darting beneath a rusted pipe. The single weed pushing through a crack in the concrete. These tiny resistances, so easily overlooked, feel like metaphors for your own struggle. The guards pace steadily, their boots echoing off the wet floor. Occasionally, they pause to peer out at the storm, faces shadowed beneath rain-slicked caps. You wonder if they, too, feel the weight of this rainy day pressing on their spirits. Scientists have found that natural sounds like rain can actually reduce cortisol levels, helping to ease anxiety and promote sleep. You try to use the sound as a balm, imagining it washing away the tension coiled in your muscles. Night falls with a steady drizzle still falling, each drop a soft tap against the metal bars. You let your eyes close, the world narrowing to the gentle rhythm of rain and your steady breath. Somewhere deep inside, you know this storm will pass, as all things do. Sleep, slow and steady, pulls you under, quiet, gentle, and necessary. The morning sun struggles through heavy clouds, casting a grayish light that filters unevenly into your cell. The air is damp and cool, a lingering reminder of last night's rain. You stretch slowly, feeling the stiffness in your muscles, and listen to the distant sounds of activity, a hammer striking metal, the shuffle of feet, voices exchanged in low murmurs. News arrives that talks between the U.S. and Cuba have resumed, this time with more urgency. The Bay of Pigs invasion, though a failure, has sparked an intense spotlight on the island, drawing global attention and escalating Cold War tensions. You sense the weight of this political drama in the air, thick and oppressive, as if the very walls of your prison bear witness to a world on the brink. You recall the secrecy that cloaked the invasion's planning stages, see operatives working behind closed doors, the cloak and dagger feel of clandestine meetings in shadowed rooms. It was a mission shrouded in misinformation, hoping to mask American involvement while arming Cuban exiles with weapons and hope. Scientists still argue whether the invasion's failure was due more to poor strategic planning or the lack of sufficient air support. The initial airstrikes intended to cripple Castro's air force were delayed and limited, leaving the exile forces vulnerable on the beaches. It's a classic case of too little, too late, where timing meant everything. Here's a quirky detail. During the invasion, some of the aircraft were painted with fake Cuban Air Force insignias to disguise their origin. The ruse didn't last long, but it shows the lengths to which planners went to maintain plausible deniability. Imagine pilots flying under false colors, caught between patriotism and subterfuge. Outside, the prison yard is quieter today. You hear a bird call, sharp and bright against the muted backdrop, and wonder what freedom must feel like for creatures born to fly. You trace your fingers over the rough edge of your bunk, feeling the texture, the coldness, a stark contrast to the warmth you long for. Scientists have found that small moments of sensory awareness, like touching textured surfaces or hearing birdsong, can improve mental resilience under stress. You try to focus on these details, grounding yourself in the present despite the uncertainty. As dusk settles, the sky streaked with purples and blues, you feel a subtle shift inside, a mixture of weariness and determination. Sleep comes, lighter than before, a fragile refuge amid the storm of history unfolding around you. You awaken to the faint hum of distant engines, a low, persistent drone that vibrates through the prison walls. The sound is oddly rhythmic, like a heartbeat pulsing in the background of your confined existence. You sit up, stretching your arms toward the barred window, where the sky is a pale wash of dawn light, streaked with soft pinks and blues. The news today brings whispers of growing tensions beyond the Bay of Pigs, how the Cuban Missile Crisis is beginning to take shape, a dangerous dance between superpowers on a kniff's edge. The invasion's failure didn't end the struggle, it merely shifted it into a new, more terrifying phase. You feel the weight of this history pressing in on you, as if the very air is charged with electricity. You recall the raw nerves and fear that gripped the invasion force, many of whom were young men fueled by dreams of reclaiming their homeland. They faced not only Castro's soldiers, but also the crushing reality of international politics and betrayal. It was a bitter lesson in how ideals collide with the harshness of reality. Scientists still debate the extent to which the invasion influenced Soviet decisions to place nuclear missiles in Cuba. Some argue the botched attempt convinced Khrushchev that a show of force, was necessary to protect the island. Others believe it was part of a broader strategic plan unrelated to the Bay of Pigs. The truth remains a complex puzzle of motives and timing. Here's a quirky fact. One of the invasion's unexpected consequences was a surge in Cuban cigar production, which became a symbolic export as the island defied American embargoes. It's fascinating how something as simple as a cigar can carry so much cultural and political weight. The prison guards move with a new tension today, their faces tighter, their eyes scanning the horizon more often. You wonder what they think about this distant chess game that so deeply affects their lives and yours. Scientists have shown that heightened stress and uncertainty can impair decision-making and memory recall. You notice how your own thoughts sometimes feel scattered, fragmented like pieces of a puzzle that don't quite fit. As night falls, you stare at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the prison's ventilation. You imagine the vast, starry sky outside, the world turning silently beyond these walls. Sleep comes slowly, a reluctant surrender to the weight of another day. The morning light filters in weakly through the barred window, casting long, narrow shadows across the cold floor of your cell. You lie still for a moment, feeling the weight of the previous day's revelations settle deep in your chest. The story of the Bay of Pigs has morphed from distant history into a living, breathing saga that pulses through the walls around you. You think about the international reaction, the shockwaves that rippled across the globe. Nations watched with bated breath as the U.S. faced public humiliation, its covert operation laid bare. Castro's forces, bolstered by Soviet support, tightened their grip on the island, a beacon of defiance amid a sea of global tension. Scientists still argue whether the invasion hardened Castro's resolve, or merely accelerated Cuba's alignment with the Soviet Union. Some suggest that without the invasion, Cuba might have maintained a more neutral stance, but the attack pushed it irrevocably into the Soviet camp, deepening the Cold War divide. Here's a quirky detail. Some of the exile fighters reportedly brought with them lucky charms and trinkets, a small cross, a faded photograph, a coin. These tokens were whispered talismans of hope, comfort in the chaos, reminders of lives left behind and dreams yet to be fulfilled. Outside your cell, you hear the distant clatter of a football game beginning in the prison yard. The ball bounces unevenly across cracked concrete, punctuated by occasional shouts and laughter, fleeting sounds of humanity persisting in adversity. You smile faintly, remembering your own childhood games, where the world felt larger and freer. Scientists have found that social interactions, even small ones like these, can significantly boost mood and cognitive function, offering vital relief in stressful environments. You long for such simple connections, even as you sit alone, surrounded by silence. As evening descends, you watch the fading light soften the edges of the cell, the shadows lengthening like gentle arms reaching out to embrace you. You close your eyes, letting the day's heaviness dissolve into the quiet calm of night. Sleep arrives like a gentle tide, slow and steady, pulling you beneath the surface where time and fear lose their grip. You awaken to the muffled murmur of a radio broadcast echoing faintly through the hallways, a distant voice reciting speeches, news reports, and the occasional crackle of static. The world outside your cell feels simultaneously closer and more unreachable than ever. The Bay of Pigs invasion has morphed from a failed military operation into a symbol of the tangled Cold War, where ideology, espionage, and raw human courage intertwine. You think about the exile fighters, many of whom were driven by dreams of reclaiming their homeland, but found themselves caught in a geopolitical game far larger than their own lives. The mission's failure marked a profound moment of reckoning, personal and political. Scientists still debate whether the invasion could have succeeded with different leadership or more robust support. Some argue that strategic miscalculations doomed the mission, while others suggest that the political climate made success impossible from the start. Here's a quirky fact. Some of the CIA operatives involved reportedly used code names based on characters from classic literature: Falstaff, Beowulf, and Icarus. These names lent a strange air of theatricality to the otherwise grim realities of covert warfare. Outside, the prison yard hums quietly with the soft shuffle of feet and low conversations, a fragile echo of life beyond confinement. You hear a guard whistle, a sharp, staccato note, breaking the rhythm, reminding you of boundaries both physical and psychological. Scientists have found that auditory stimuli, like whistles or sudden noises, can trigger heightened alertness and stress responses, even in familiar environments. You notice your own muscles tense momentarily, the body's instinctive reaction to perceived threats. As the day fades, the light softens to a warm amber, casting long shadows that stretch and blend like memories slipping through your mind. You close your eyes, breathing deeply, welcoming the slow embrace of sleep, a refuge from the relentless tide of history. The dawn seeps in like a muted whisper, washing over the cold stone walls of your cell with pale, hesitant fingers. You lay still, feeling the slow rhythm of your breath, steady and unhurried. Outside, the faint sounds of life trickle through the silence, a distant bird call, the rustling of leaves, footsteps echoing on the concrete. Each sound is a gentle reminder of a world continuing beyond your confinement. Your mind drifts back to the final days of the Bay of Pigs invasion, to the desperate attempts to regroup, to hold ground, to survive. You picture the weary faces of the exile fighters, soaked in sweat and sand, caught between hope and despair. The beach was no longer a gateway to freedom but a trap, a stage for a grim surrender. Scientists still argue whether the exile forces were adequately trained for the terrain and enemy tactics. Some believe that with better intelligence and local support, the outcome could have been different. Others argue that the overwhelming power of Castro's forces made defeat inevitable. Here's a quirky tidbit. During the chaotic retreat, some soldiers reportedly disguised themselves by wearing local fishermen's clothing to evade capture. The image of heavily armed men in ragged fishing gear adds an odd, almost absurd layer to the somber reality of the retreat. The guards outside grow quieter as night approaches, their footsteps softer, their voices hushed. The prison feels suspended in a fragile moment between wakefulness and sleep, a place where time stretches and bends. Scientists have found that circadian rhythms deeply influence mood and cognition, especially in confined environments. You feel the subtle pull of your own internal clock urging rest, even as your mind races with memories and reflections. You close your eyes, letting the calm seep into your bones, the steady pulse of your heartbeat a gentle lullaby. Sleep wraps around you slowly, a soft, warm cloak against the chill of the world. You awake to the soft rustling of leaves outside your barred window, the morning breeze carrying a faint, salty tang from the nearby sea. The sky is a gentle gradient of lavender and peach, promising a day that holds both weight and hope. You stretch slowly, feeling the familiar ache in your muscles, a reminder of confinement and endurance. The story of the Bay of Pigs invasion is no longer just a tale of military blunders and political gambits. It's a story of resilience, of the human spirit grappling with the tides of history. You imagine those young exile fighters, some just boys really, caught between dreams of freedom and the brutal reality of war. Scientists still debate the invasion's long-term effects on Cuban-American relations. While it deepened mistrust and hostility, it also galvanized communities on both sides, forging identities in opposition and solidarity. It's a reminder that history is never simple, never a single story. Here's a quirky fact to ponder. After the invasion, Fidel Castro reportedly wore a beard to symbolize his revolutionary zeal, but he also used it as a psychological tactic, cultivating an image both fierce and approachable. It's fascinating how appearance can shape perception and power. The prison yard outside is quiet now, bathed in the soft glow of morning light. You listen to the distant call of a gull, the faint hum of life moving forward, relentless and indifferent. Scientists have found that even in isolation, the mind seeks patterns and connections, weaving stories to make sense of chaos. You feel that impulse now, piecing together fragments of history, memory, and hope. As the day unfolds, you let the tension ease, the narrative of conflict settling into the background of your thoughts. Sleep will come again, gentle and sure, carrying you through the night with whispered promises of peace. Now, as your eyes grow heavier, and the world softens around you, let your thoughts drift like leaves on a slow-moving stream. The past, with all its conflicts and complexities, fades gently into the quiet night. You are safe here, cocooned in the calm embrace of darkness. Let the gentle hum of silence soothe your mind, the steady rhythm of your breath a gentle guide into rest. Imagine the waves lapping quietly against a distant shore, each ebb and flow a reminder of time's steady passage. The heavy weight of history dissolves into a soft haze, and you find yourself floating, untethered and free. Your body relaxes, your heartbeat slows, and the tension of the day melts away. With each slow breath, feel the warmth of calm settle deeper, a peaceful balm for your restless thoughts. The night wraps you in its quiet comfort, a silent guardian until dawn. Rest now, knowing that every ending is a promise of a new beginning. End of script. Sweet dreams.